If you've ever wanted to learn how to handstand but gotten stuck or frustrated, then this episode is for you.
Go.
What's up, guys? It's Fernandez. Welcome back to the White Belt Podcast, where every single episode it's my goal for you to level up your movement and mindset so that you can live a fitter and more fulfilled life. This is the beginning of a brand new season. It's season 2, which I'm super stoked about. I've been putting a lot of work in behind the scenes to get this up and out to you, and I've got a lot of really cool guests coming up in the pipeline. I've interviewed experts in pretty much everything from nutrition and gut health to biomechanics to posture, strength development, athletic performance, injury prevention. It's all coming up, so I hope you guys get really excited because I'm also really excited. And also, this podcast really is for you guys. I genuinely mean it when I say that I want you to walk away from every single episode having leveled up in some meaningful way around your movement or your mindset, or both. And so if there's a guest that you really love to see me interview, or if there's a topic that you are struggling with and you'd like to see me cover, then drop me a comment on the YouTube video, DM me on Instagram, and I'll do my best to make sure that I put it into a future episode or get it covered in some way. All right, let's get into it. So my guest today is none other than Sundi. Sundi is a hand balance coach, and he's been training people for the last 12 years, helping them succeed in all different physical realms. But for the last 6 years specifically, he's been focusing on hand balance coaching at all levels. He's worked with experts, but he spends a lot of time working with beginners and helping them get their first handstand as well. So he's perfectly positioned to talk about with a lot of experience and a lot of really great insight about the topics we cover today. This episode is a treasure trove for beginner and intermediate hand balances. We give you the tools to sidestep all of the common pitfalls that I myself have definitely fallen into, Sundi says he's fallen into, and he's also helped countless beginners work their way out of those common beginner traps and just month or even years long plateaus where they don't feel like they're making any progress. So if you've always wanted to be able to handstand, or you've tried and you can't seem to get it to the level that you would like it, you're in the right place. If you're new around here as well, then welcome. And there are show notes to everything that we discuss, including people, resources, even exercises that we discuss that Sundi recommends in this podcast, including video demonstrations. So if you want to make this an actionable podcast, then you can go and there's resources for you here to do that. You can find those over on whitebelt.com, whitebelt.com/podcasts. You're going to love it. I've talked enough. Let's get into it. Please welcome Sundi. Dude, first of all, thanks for being here, man. I'm really keen to get into this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. I'm looking forward to having a good little chat about handstands and whatever else comes up.
Yeah, dude. So when I was doing research for this podcast, the first photo I could find of you on Instagram was you doing like a one-arm handstand flag on canes already. So my first question to you is, did you just come out of the womb being able to do a one-arm handstand? Or if not, then what's your background
Complete opposite.
Like? Yeah.
Complete opposite. Like, I guess it's such an individual thing, and you notice that people's backgrounds are so varied. And if people have done dance and different things growing up, they usually pick hand balancing up a lot quicker, because a huge component of it is body awareness. So orienting yourself in space, or assuming the correct alignment required for whatever position you're working on. And that's a huge thing, because of course it's strength and conditioning and stuff like that. But you can be very just not be able to balance, right? So body awareness, which I guess ties into alignment and positioning, is a huge part of it. So for me, I was starting with probably more sort of experience under my belt movement-wise, because I had an active childhood. I did quite a lot of martial arts and surfing and skating, and I always had some kind of physical practice, especially growing up in the countryside where there's nothing else to really do but climb trees, go surfing, climb on the neighbors' roofs and jump up and down and then run away, like stuff like that. So we had to kind of create our own fun just from running around the place. So for me, no, even so, I think it's quite universal. Everyone thinks they're their own special brand of challenged when it comes to handstands, but I think it's quite universal. It's just kind of pretty fucking hard. And I certainly didn't fall out of the womb doing one-arm handstands. It took me a long time, longer than a lot of other peers who were doing the same thing, but also faster than others. It is really quite an individual experience.
Yeah, I think you're so right. It is so individualized. And of course, we all have, by virtue of different backgrounds and different morphologies and different strengths and weaknesses, we all have different challenges when coming to the handstand. But it's fucking just super, super hard.
It's
So
pretty brutal. I think I refer to handstands as personal development as well. Because if you think you're like special, see, when I first started doing it, I'd sort of pick some other things up pretty fast. And, you grow up and people like when you're younger, everyone's like, oh, you're talented, you're special, you're intelligent. You kind of get fed that more when you're younger. And as you get older, like you're just like, oh, I suck. So for me, it was a bit of like an awakening of, oh shit, like I'm going to really have to work hard at this and I'm not particularly talented and I'm just going to have to deal with that. So there was definitely some internal resistance initially because it was just so difficult. And then, as I went along, there was definitely some personal growth and a lot of things that are positive came out of it besides just getting more skilled, I guess.
yeah,
So,
dude. I love that handstands as personal development thing. And I want to get into that later on in the podcast and ask you about what handstands kind of brought to the rest of your life as well. But I also want this to be a really
sure.
actionable podcast as well for people listening to really hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls that both you and I have made, but especially with, incredible length of experience and breadth of experience as well. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff we can get into, but if you're like already doing one arm handstands in 2016, like when did you start hand balancing and how did you start?
I reckon my first exposure to kind of being inverted upside down on my hands and doing like some form of a handstand was when I was probably 12 years old, doing capoeira
Oh,
in
nice.
Byron. And, as a kid, I didn't really get much training. I just flung myself up. I couldn't hold a handstand. I could walk around with my legs going everywhere. And I never really trained it specifically. I wouldn't say like my handstand journey, like proper training started then. It's just when I was exposed to it. But throughout the years after that, when I was doing other physical things, I could still always kind of kick up into a really dodgy handstand and walk around just because it had kind of been that seed had been planted when I was young. And then when I got to the age of about 20, 21, I was working in gyms in London as a personal trainer over there and a gym instructor. And I was doing quite a lot of weights. And then for whatever reason, a little bit of calisthenics started sneaking back in. I started working on pull-ups and push-ups and things like that. And that kind of just naturally led me to start doing a few more handstands a bit more consistently. I had a goal to be able to just hold still. And I just taught myself how to do that from just flinging up and trying, which is sometimes the case. I think because I had that previous movement background as a kid, that allowed me to get to a certain level just by myself, where a lot of people that try that method when they're starting as an adult can spend, 3 or 4 years just kicking up and falling over and not really getting anywhere. It was a pretty key moment where I went and saw a circus show. A friend from the gym that I had made was managing a circus nightclub where you'd go and have a really nice meal, really cool music, really good service. And you'd sit there having your meal, having a drink, and there'd be a big, long kind of like catwalk table where circus performers would come up and do aerial straps or hand balancing and
That's
manipulation. And yeah, it was really cool. And there was one act, which was really cool. It was a guy on straps. I forget his name now, but he did a James Bond straps act. And I just thought it was so cool. And at the end, my friend introduced me to him and we had a chat. Turns out he was also a hand balancer. And I just said, look, I'm doing handstands, yada, yada. Like, when did you start? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, yeah, I started when I was like 23, trained at NICA, so the National Institute of Circus Arts in Melbourne. And it kind of just made me realize like, oh, like I could actually pursue this and get somewhere. I had this idea that I had to be born into the circus from the age of 3. And I guess that ties into another thing that helps unlock a mental barrier I had in place that a lot of people have, which is that you can do some pretty amazing things pretty late in life. And I think through things like social media, there's like positive and negatives to social media. Obviously, there's a lot of positives though. A lot of people are seeing like, 50-year-old guys and girls like learning one-arm handstands. And there's something that clicks in your mind when you see that. You go, oh, like I can do that too. And that's a pretty huge thing. So there was one guy, his name was Steve Atlas. I've never met him in person. We've messed some messaging back and forth, but he's a great guy. Seems to be running a really cool gig over, I think, in the States. And I saw him. He was maybe in his 40s or late 30s at the time. And I saw him doing some pretty amazing handstand related stuff. And I went, fuck, I'm like 21, 22. If he can do it at that age, what's stopping me? So that was a pivotal moment. And from that point, I got in contact with Yuval and began some pretty serious focus training for the first time. So I would say probably about 8 years ago is when I went, all right, I want to do this. And I wanted to do it for myself. I tried different jobs. I tried an office job. I couldn't sit still for more than, an hour in the chair. Hated it. I tried hospitality. It wasn't for me. And I kind of just made this personal promise to myself that like, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to do it for me and everything else can just fuck off for the time being. So I really made it a priority. If I missed a session, I'd train Monday to Friday. If I missed a session, I'd make up for it on the weekend. I was quite gung-ho for that first year and a bit. Yeah.
Dude, that's a sick story. There's so many highlights in there. First of all, that James Bond strap show, that is awesome. And I love, like, first of all, taking inspiration from around you. And I think, yeah, there's so many negative parts that get talked about social media that for a good reason as well. But I think the close cousin of that comparison that can be quite unhealthy is permission as well. And to get the permission, to get the understanding that there are other people out there who've walked the path before you, who are like, hey man, like they started then, like maybe I could do something like this as well. And just like you said at the start, there's all these temptations, and I've definitely had them as well, to say, oh, well, for me, because I'm tall or I've got skinny wrists or whatever, these excuses.
Yes, always excuse.
Yeah, somehow what stand in the way from me being able to do this skill. And while that might present a unique brand of challenge, at the same time, like
I've got a big butt relation to how tall I am. Doing planche fucking sucks. Style depressors are really hard for me. Like, but I'm not going to be like, that's going to stop me. I'm just going to have to get stronger. So
you get extra advantages on the dance floor as well. So it balances out.
Exactly.
So 8 years kind of specific hand dancing training. At what point did you start taking students and teaching, and when did you begin that branch of your career?
Yeah, good question. It's kind of been probably the last 4 years and a bit that I've really just focused almost all in on just teaching people how to handstand. And it just started with renting space in a local Baptist church hall down the road and just running like a casual class and just starting that way, charging $5 or $10 for an hour and a half class. And that was pretty much it. And I guess for me, I was in a unique position where I had a job at a gym working for a really beautiful couple. And so the unique situation where I had work with them, a livable amount of income and hours, and they were paying me obviously for my services. I was teaching classes, doing some PT and stuff for them, doing some reception work. And I started that casual class and it just generated, I guess, momentum, and it felt right. So I went for it. And as I got more and more, private sessions and classes running, I just reduced the amount of gym work I was doing for them and increased the amount of teaching. But I was using their space eventually. So I started paying them and they were happy, and I started dropping shifts. And then eventually I just had one shift left on a Friday. And I said, guys, look, I want to give this up. I want to teach handstands on this day. And they were like, yep, that's totally fine. So there was a transition over about a year, just kind of went like that. And the handstands increased and the other work decreased. And I just haven't really looked back since then.
That is super cool. And I think it's a really nice transition as well. Often people can romanticize the dropping everything and quitting my job and leaving everything and putting it all out in the line, but it doesn't have to be this huge leap of faith. You can make slow transitions. That's again,
you can be strategic about it. And I think maybe that happens with people when they just drop it all at once. They've been doing something that doesn't align who they are for too long, and they get to a breaking point and they wait for the breaking point. But I think if you can look forward and be a little bit more strategic and go, look, I don't want to do this in another year. What can I start doing now to get me out of this situation? And we all do it in different ways. Like for me, I'm in love still with teaching in person here in Melbourne, but at some point I'd love to travel, but I want to still teach handstands. So, it's been about a year now. I've just been doing little bits and pieces and building that up in the background, rather than just quitting all in-person teaching one day and pissing off and then figuring out while I'm on the road, there'll be something set up there already.
I think that's a super smart approach, man. Yeah. I'm really keen to get into the weeds about handstand stuff.
Lots of weeds.
There are so many weeds, yeah. It's such a rewarding practice, but it's also one of the things that it's not like learning many other physical skills. I think there's a spectrum of complexity of learning physical skills, and some things you can really just dive into and pick up pretty quickly, and other things a lot more weeds and a lot more traps, like we're saying. So let's just say I've got a bit of a strength training background, done some gym work. when I first come to you and want to learn how to handstand, let's say I've never really been upside down, what is our first couple of weeks going to look like?
Yeah. So I think handstands, why it's so difficult, one of the reasons is it's this really evil combination of physical conditioning and skill. And you can only practice a skill with as much work capacity as you have. So that's one thing to definitely think about. The other thing is, to answer your question, like people coming in for the first time, is just kind of to assess them. You know, some people will have hypermobile shoulders and hypermobile wrists. Some people will be very tight in those areas. So it's going to be more or less of a focus on those different areas depending on what presents. And then it's just generally how I approach it with someone in that situation, if they're really starting from ground zero, is a structure before balance kind of mindset. So I'm not going to worry about them kicking up and trying to catch a handstand or spotting them for balance and stuff right off the bat if they're starting from a really low, like, physical conditioning standpoint. So a big focus to me is just on structure, and not just holding handstands against the wall. Like, their external rotators might be really weak. Their pulling strength might be really weak. A bit more of a general across the board approach. I mean, people who have done a fair bit of just general strength conditioning PT with a gym or with a personal trainer before coming to me make great students, because a lot of that stuff is already taken care of and the focus can be more on just the handstand stuff itself, while still pushing along those other elements in the background. You don't want to have a super unbalanced push and pull, for example, as you go along. I've tried that. It doesn't work on myself. So yeah, I would really say I would assess them, see what they need. People are quite different. Some people I've worked with, and their physical preparedness is amazing. They go on the wall, they hold 3 minutes, they've got good body tension, really strong, like, core, everything looks great. But then you go to balance them and they're just like a falling tree. Boom. Let go of them. Boom. Or they're doing their, say, wrist drives, or I'm calling by the normal name, toe pulls or heel pulls off the wall. They come off and there's no reaction. There's no feel. It's almost they have a thought that they just have to hold really still, and by luck they might stay there. So that's one extreme example. Then a lot of the focus will be just on teaching them balance mechanics, teaching them how to feel and correct. And then you have the opposite. You have some people have incredible feel and they can wiggle around and fight for that position really well, just almost naturally, but they're really weak. And then that's going to be the thing you're going to focus and build up. So it's quite a broad response, but it is, like we said earlier, like a really individual kind of scenario, coaching handstands to people.
I'm so glad you brought up the assessment piece, because I could not agree more. And yes, handstands is very specific, but I also think this applies across the board. Like, understanding that human bodies are super, super complex, and they're all going to have different starting points coming to the same skill. So what one person needs is going to be very, very different to what another person needs. And you mentioned like shoulder external rotation and all of these different qualities are definitely going to affect how, like, the kind of structure that's coming to the balance. So yeah, I think that this is part of a reason why working with a coach is so crucial, because unfortunately it's not always as easy as just jumping in to be like, oh, this is all beginner drills, all beginners should be doing this. Now, there are some good bang for buck ones, but if you're really interested in making some progress pretty early on, then I'd say an assessment and trying to figure out what you need and where you need to work in order to kind of get into that shape of the handstand is
totally. It's much more efficient process. It's also one of the reasons I only teach one-on-one or in a maximum small group of 6 people in person. Mm-hmm. So I run these 6-week short courses here in Melbourne, and I only have 6 people because they all need different things. And 6 is sort of the number that I like to have, where I can individualize effectively still and set everyone up with different homework and different programs to work on it, different skills and drills during class. So
yeah, I definitely feel you. And I think I'm pretty similar as well. And I want to kind of start a little bit more zoomed out with those general principles and then zoom in more and more to more specific stuff. So
sure.
If you were to give me the rundown of what you think the first principles of a handstand are, like the big buckets of types of things that people need to work on, concepts that they need to understand when beginning a handstand practice.
Yeah. So obviously, like we talked about structure. So just, one thing I often joke about when I teach my classes is if you were going to go and do a tango or a salsa class, right? And you could only stand on your feet for 10 seconds, you're not going to learn the dance steps very well, right?
Great point. Yeah.
So it's kind of like you just need that base conditioning. Like really classic benchmark is a lot of focus should just be on that physical preparedness and getting like a 1 minute chest to wall handstand, let's say, just to give you some capacity and time on your hands to work with. So that's like a really big just initial goal, and learning the alignment and form and things like that as well. Then once you have that structure, it's more about balance mechanics. So a sort of, I guess, a mental understanding of overbalance and underbalance. So overbalance would be falling over onto your back, underbalance would be falling to your stomach, and then working on drills to address those things. So someone gets the feel for what takes place then. And what's quite funny is sometimes you get someone and you explain everything and you just see them that it's like, they're hearing it, but it's just nothing's computing. And it's even a case of spotting someone sometimes and just going, I just want you to push you with your fingers. Don't even try and be good or balanced. Just push that. Or, okay, we're going to go into handstand and from the hip, just move your legs like that. Just so they can feel that, oh shit, where my legs are in space influences which way I go. And then, like toe pulls, heel pulls. I mean, there's a million drills, but again, it comes back to like looking what the individual needs and giving them the right stuff.
Dude, this is really awesome as well. And especially because there are thousands and thousands of drills out there. And
there's drills out your ears. It's crazy. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. And so many, I think the kind of marketplace of the internet is really driven towards in fitness, drills and drills and drills and drills and exercises and exercises. And this is the one exercise, the top 84 exercises that you have to be doing if you want this. And it can really distract from the underlying principles and understanding, well, what specific outcomes are these drills eliciting in the body? What are we trying to do with each one of these drills? And how do we plug and play this into the person that needs it the most? And this is the most important thing. One of my favorite, I guess, like learning experts, his name's Josh Waitskin. He's a chess grandmaster and martial arts and other things. And he talks about positions on a chessboard, beginning with positions of reduced complexity. And so what that means is there'll be just a pawn and a king, for example, or just a pawn, a bishop and a king, and just understanding how these pieces move and how they affect relationships on the board. The goal is not necessarily to jump in and win the chess game first battle, but it's to understand the kind of big underlying principles and how to apply them and how they affect different things. Because the overall skill is so complex that if you try and do everything out of the gate, you're almost certainly not going to have the individual constituent parts to pull that off the first time.
Yeah, so you try and do everything, you do nothing, essentially. Is
100%.
And going back a little bit to just assessing people, I guess one of the things that you develop with a lot of experience is just an eye to seeing what's going wrong. So just like after you watch a lot of bodies try this kind of stuff, you start noticing small details. Like a recent example would be a student that I had where they could rebalance off the wall well, they had good conditioning, good strength. But I kept going, why aren't you catching a handstand? It's like, it's always a puzzle. It's what keeps this interesting. It's like you get challenged as a coach, right? And I was watching, I just noticed, watching the hands really carefully, she just wasn't breaking with her fingers when she was kicking up. Because it's this key moment when you do an entry to handstand where there's quite a big drive. I call it wrist driving. So driving with the wrists and hands into the ground to stop yourself falling over. I call it putting on the brakes, just with the hands. And she just didn't understand that was required. We sort of talked about it, but until sometimes you really just drive the point home, it doesn't happen. And then sometimes, and this is rare in handstands, you have these aha moments with the student, and then immediately it gets better. So that's an example of something like that, where she's like, oh, okay, I really need to slam on the brakes harder than I'm used to doing in my, let's say, heel pulls to come on and off the wall, and I'll be able to stop myself. So it is definitely being very present when you're working in person and just watching. There's quite a lot of just me sitting back and getting someone to do 20 reps of something, just to get also an average of what's happening. I want to see 10 of your just average ones at least to get an average of the thing that's happening the most often.
Super important for coaches, but also for the people learning the skills, because this is a chaotic skill. This is, there's so much going on. And so to think that, there's a question that I get asked sometimes as well. I mean, I'm not a hand balancing coach, but I do help some people with their handstands a little bit. And especially early on, people say, so what am I doing wrong? And well, there can be on one rep can be one thing, and then on another rep, and it can be something completely different.
Exactly. And they go, what do I do to stop that happening? I go, well, the thing I tell you to do to stop that happening might be the complete opposite of what you need to do in the next kick up you do.
Yeah,
So
100%.
Yeah.
Which is a frustrating answer, but I think this is why volume of practice and repetition is so important. And also, another thing that you mentioned early on is body awareness as well. And awareness, proprioception, understanding where your limbs are in space. This was one of the hardest things when I first started handstanding, because I'd never done any inversions as a kid. I had a trampoline as a kid and never even once attempted a backflip. I never even once attempted a flip because I was like, that is dangerous and that is scary, and I'm terrified of that.
Oh, my older brother just forced me to.
I needed that older brother because
he's like, you're not getting off this trampoline until you do a backflip, and he'd just spin me over, and then eventually I could do one.
But yeah, like you mentioned your background in capoeira, and there's a lot of cartwheeling and different inversions and different balancing positions. And like you said, it's a lot more dynamic in some ways. Some people will do walking around quite a fair bit, but the emphasis is not nearly as much on staying still, but understanding what if your brain freaks the fuck out every single time you go upside down, well, that's sometimes a quality that we need to be able to cultivate first. Just like you said, if you can only stand on your feet for 10 seconds, well, if your brain literally cannot abide you being inverted because it's like perceived as a dangerous position and it's not something you've done before, that's another thing that we need to focus on as well. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that kind of body awareness piece and how you cultivate that with clients.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things I encounter, because as much as, we post of sometimes our advanced students learning one-arm handstands and like doing cool sequence with their legs and all that kind of stuff, like the majority, I mean, it's changing a little bit as I do this longer, but a lot of the work I do is just with like beginners, people that might be terrified from falling over. I get less people that are terrified from being upside down. I kind of have a bit of a prerequisite to work with me that you should have at least like a 20 or 30 second wall handstand. I don't care, back to wall, chest to wall, just because it shows that you've taken some initiative and just tried,
Right.
you've just done something.
Yeah.
But what's really common is just people being afraid of falling over. And I wouldn't lie, that's like a challenging thing to overcome sometimes. It can be as simple as with strength comes confidence. So once you build their strength up, they feel safer with doing the movement. But even then, a lot of the time, people are just terrified. That's something that in person, it's almost vital with some clients or students to actually just spot them through the movement. So I generally just build up the strength level to a reasonable level, let's say a 30 to 60 second chest to wall handstand to start with. And then I just break down the movement of falling. And I've got my own specific way of teaching falling that seems to work pretty well. It's something I also observed most people just did naturally when they hadn't had a fear of falling. So I'll heavily spot that at the start. And I've had people, fuck, shit, scream out, like all kinds of things. We always laugh when they're back on their feet. But, some genuinely terrified people, like screaming almost. But it's like, I've got you, it's fine. So I spot quite heavily. And then as I just see their confidence level increasing, I just spot less and less and less. It's just like slowly removing the training wheels off what they're doing. And I guess the only real danger someone has when they're learning to fall off freestanding handstand, when they're not super proficient yet, is if they panic. And even if you just fall flat on your back, it's only happened like twice in my classes over the last 5 years or so, and the person has been totally fine. The only real danger is you totally panic and you just let your arms go and fall on your head. Like that's the only way I can think you like seriously hurt yourself, or you kick someone next to you, but spread everyone out in class. So I guess what I'm sensing or looking for when I'm working with someone at this level we're talking about is that they're not going to panic, because you can tell. You see someone, they get quiet, they might start sweating more. You kind of just sense that they're stressed out. And then I probably won't let someone fall by themselves then, so it's just feeling where they're at, like their psychology, and just reading the signs a little bit, and then knowing when to back off more. And I get to a point with some people, I'm like, piss off, go and fall in the middle of the room. You're just bullshitting me out, because I know that it's safe and I know that it's fine. It's just a block in their head at that point, and I'm confident they'll be okay. I've even told some students, I go, you need to go and see a hypnotherapist everything fine. We'll spot. It's like they almost need to be put under with the watch and just, it's okay. You can fall, you'll be fine. So, yeah.
Yeah, dude. I love this. And I think we're really starting to, at least for listeners, starting to put together a map of some kind of key concepts that they need to understand. You mentioned the structure and just the basic structural integrity, endurance, being able to, stand on its feet in the salsa dance. I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah, if you're a beginner and you're listening to this and you have you're just starting as an adult who's done hardly any kind of training at all, in most cases, you'd be much better off in getting a really good, just general strength and conditioning coach. Body weight would probably be better, and just getting strong and just working basic mobility and then starting the handstand journey. It's going to be a safer, smoother, and more fruitful process for sure.
100%. Yeah, I think that there are those structural prerequisites to be able to, not to begin training, because obviously the training begins when you start working on the structure stuff, but the training that looks more like kicking up to a handstand begins after a certain structural prerequisite.
For sure. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, so that's a really, really key piece to understand. Another big bucket that we've been talking about is the balance piece. And you've talked about different wrist drive, different underbalance, overbalance, understanding how to do those micro corrections.
Totally.
Another, again, huge thing. You mentioned that rigidity. When I first started handstanding, I just didn't understand that it was a dynamic process. I would just kick up and just try and lock myself in as much as I could. And then I was like, oh man, I really can't I'm just not strong enough to hold this. I didn't understand that you didn't just hold your breath and get as tight as you could and then just hope that you stayed there. I didn't understand that it was a corrective, constant corrective exercise.
I think why that happens as well is that, this is one, I guess this minor downside of social media is you go on social media and you watch some crazy acrobat or someone who's very proficient at handstands and they look still, especially on camera. Yes. They look like they're not moving and you go, oh shit, I just need to get there and not move and I'll be like them. But before you're still, I call it the wiggle. I love when someone's learning and I see them going all over the place because they're actively fighting there for their position. And as you get more proficient, you get more efficient and you start reacting to overbalance and underbalance or the falling much earlier. So it's the illusion of being still. But a demonstration I do in class a lot on day one, so doing a 6-week course, is I do a handstand and I go, look at my hands. And I hold the stillest handstand I possibly can. I just go, watch my hands. And you'll just see all these little tiny twitches. I try to do my best to keep it still, but there's always those little movements going on. And I go, okay, watch what happens when I stop. The moment, half a second after I stop rebalancing with my hands, I just fall over straight away.
Yeah.
So it's this illusion of stillness, but it's dynamic. Like you said, it's very dynamic. It's just very small and subtle at various levels.
Yeah, 100%. And another kind of piece that I've taken from another guy, bro, he's a movement coach, Bren Viziroglu. I hope I'm butchering his name. I've had him on another episode of this season of the podcast, actually. Yeah. And he has a drill where he teaches people that there are many, many different points of balance. The balance is just the center of, your center of mass over the base of support. And so you can balance in a really forward lean would be a planche. There's a Mexican handstand where you've got a huge arch in your back, and there are many, many, many different points of balance. So again, a mistake I made was just thinking that I had to get into this one tiny narrow field of balance and just stay there, and then I will be upside down. But there are many, many different positions in which you can balance. And so understanding that and understanding that you're just trying to stay with that center of mass over your base of support it opens up the door so much. And that really helped me to start to understand, I can relax a little bit more and I can move into different positions and still maintain a handstand as opposed to just trying to find this one arbitrary point that is a handstand.
Yeah. And I'll riff on that a little bit more because quite a lot of things to talk about there. I guess it's also you want to be rigid enough that you're not creating too many problems to yourself. And I guess the way of illustrating that is, say you had a noodle and you held the noodle up, you had one end in your hands, the other one on here, and then you let it go and you tried to balance it, it's just going to flop to the ground. So you can't be too loose, right?
Yeah.
And then it's if you get a stick or a broomstick, you can balance it from your hand quite easily. It's simple, but if that broomstick had 3 hinges in it, they're all going to be going all over the place. So it's kind of this rigidity with room for movement. So there's a certain level of tension you need, and there's a certain level of movement you need as well to hold a handstand. And then it kind of comes back again to just looking what the person is doing and giving him that specific cue, I guess, at the right time, rather than just being like, hey guys, like this is just something everyone should do. So yeah, it needs to kind of be on a case-by-case basis. Going back a little bit to what you said about how to cultivate body awareness, it's a similar principle, I guess, is just exposing someone to drills where they have like a blind spot. So I talk sometimes about the fog, like when you go upside down, it's like this fog appears around your body and you have no idea where things are. And I deal with that with a few different positions I'm working on at the moment. I just don't really know what I'm doing. Filming helps a lot, like, you know, like doing a set, filming, I advise filming. I think you can overfilm and you can do too much of that and get a little bit too caught in your head about it. There's definitely a lot of value to having days where you just feel everything. You're just going by feel. So this, for me, it's this combination of like the analytical brain side, rewatching the film, then trying something different and seeing what that feeling equals in reality when you watch it on playback, but also just going, I've had a lot of breakthroughs in my own practice just by not filming and going by feel.
That is an awesome tip. And that's not something I've heard someone explain so succinctly before, but I could not agree more. I'm a big believer in using a camera to get initial feedback and to help people close the gap between what they feel, what they think their body is doing and what they're actually doing. But not everything is just, after you have a little bit more of that understanding, you've also got to be able to do it in real time. And that comes from a lot of focus on feeling. I think probably especially after you move to other head positions and stuff like that, where you don't have a similar spot, then the feeling becomes even more important. And that's, I don't think, something that you can get from just watching footage back. So yeah, fully relate to that. And also just in terms of body awareness, like it's good to give an example of a drill or something so people understand. But a lot of people when they kick up to handstand, it's like they don't have legs anymore. The legs are an afterthought, and it's half of your body weight either going over, under, or trying to join them, and it's all crazy. So like a classic drill that can be useful depending on the person. Most people can benefit if they're beginners, but you kick up back to the wall. Let's find the edge of my frame. Well, how weird! So everything's reversed. So that's the wall. You kick up back to the wall. I won't give specifics and technique, but you come off the wall, push with the wrist, you're floating, and then swapping the legs back to the wall. Float. Swap the legs slowly back to the wall. Just things that are getting people thinking about and moving their legs around in space. Just again, it can be really useful. That kind of ties into what I believe are the three main actions and areas of the body you need to manage to hold a handstand. And it's not taking into account like planche and stuff like that. It's quite general, but it's overwhelming. People are like, oh, Sundi, like I kick up and there's a million things to think about. I go, okay, if that's the case, just focus on these three things. The pressure in the hands, pretty non-negotiable. You could go pretty crazy rebalancing with the shoulders and still maybe be able to do it, but it's kind of like an essential thing, pressure in the hands and work on stuff that works that. Then a huge one, obviously, and this is one of the most important things in handstands, is shoulder position. So pushing up and creating a bridge of stability between the arm and the rest of the body. That also means that when you push with the hand, that energy travels through and influences the rest of your body in space. So shoulder position, that's also not just pushing up, it's also, if you open a lot with your shoulder, you'll underbalance. If you close too much, you'll probably hurt your wrist, potentially, depending what level you're at, or you'll just like overbalance. You can underbalance from that as well. Again, context. It depends what else the body is doing. Yeah. And then the third thing, so we've got hands, shoulder position, then we've got feet. And I say, where are the feet in space? What I mean by that is if the legs were together, from the hip, changing the position of the feet in space. Again, if you arch a lot, unless you go into a Mexican, which, we're not going to be doing that with beginners, you're going to fall over. Or if you fold a lot, unless you're able to press back up, you're probably going to fall at that point. So correcting from the hip is a really useful thing to think about as well. So you get overwhelmed. What's happening in my hands? What's happening in my shoulders? Where are my feet in space? It's just a good thing to just come back to. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to pinch that little explanation there. That's a really good. And there can be so many. I think that's phenomenal. There can be and there are so many things to think about. Yeah, I made a YouTube video just about those 3 points. I was like, if you stop using your hands, you're beep. You don't know where the feet are, you're
And just broke down some of those things for people just to get them thinking a little bit about those things, because it can be really helpful. And the most hilarious thing about some of these basics we've been talking to in these previous points is that when I'm having a shitty one-arm handstand day, it's usually because I'm fucking up one of these basics.
Yeah,
my shoulder
right.
position, maybe my shoulder's just closed because I'm tired and I'm just not being present enough. Or, say I'm working full position one arm, so legs together, and I start piking. That's a bad habit of mine. I need to remember to keep that hip extension. Just all these things that I teach people, they come back to haunt me. And by doing those correctly, it's not going to fix everything depending on the day. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with one arm practice and handstands in general, but more often than not, it's one of those basic fundamentals that I've just become sort of ignorant of on that day or week.
Yeah, dude. So first of all, I'll leave a link to that video in the show notes as well, because I'd love people to check that out. And also another Sundi Suby quote I'll pull is, nothing is sexier or more useful than basics. So, and I think there's a lot of power in reducing the complexity and focusing on those big buckets, and because so often that is where things go wrong. So
yeah, I'm terrible for that. Like, I'm getting better as I get more years in the game with this stuff, but it's like another coach, I can't remember his name, but he talks about like shiny thing syndrome, where you just see this cool tricky trick and then you abandon your basics and put that in your program, and then your basics get bad, so the shiny trick is even harder to do. Like it really comes back to just doing the basics, but it's like, okay, I've got my basics, but I also want to learn the tricky trick. You just have to make sure that you keep a decent amount of your basics maintained. And, it's like how, stuff that starts becoming easy kind of becomes more the beginning of the session to warm up, and then layer some of those harder tricks, I guess, on top without completely abandoning, your foundations. And that's a bit of an art, because people's programs and lives and, time for training varies. But I guess it's just assessing, if you're coaching yourself, it's just assessing where you're at and knowing what you can let go of and what you can keep to maintain a certain level while adding new drills and skills to the mix.
100%. That actually leads me onto another question that I want to ask you, because the reality is that we want to be able to give people information, and not everyone's going to go and hire a specific hand balancing coach. So there's going to be many people who are going to at least begin by going it alone, and that can be a thorny territory for handstands. So I'd love to ask you, what do many kind of self-guided beginners not understand about how to train for the handstand, and what do they do wrong that sets them back or leads to them spinning their wheels for a long time? What kind of fundamental mistakes do they make?
One really common one is, what people will do is they'll spend a bit of time on the wall at the start, and they might get somewhat proficient at doing like toe and heel pulls. I call heel pulls wrist drives because it's just more clear. You're driving with the wrists, the feet come off. Toe pulls I call chest to wall balancing, because again, it just feels more clear. I don't want, when people are training those skills, they think, oh, toe and heel pulls, I need to pull my legs off, and they kick and stuff like that. So it's just a different way of phrasing it. Plus, you don't know how people teach certain skills that are commonly described. So maybe I teach it differently. So I just call it something else. Sure. So anyway, they might have decent chest to wall balancing, wrist drives happening, but then before they build up enough proficiency with those elements, and before they have a solid enough freestanding handstand, what a lot of people do is they just completely stop the wall stuff and just go freestanding. And because they're kicking up sometimes and only holding 3 seconds every 10 attempts, they get really weak again.
Yeah, right.
Because you're not going to maintain any kind of conditioning from holding 3 seconds out of 10 attempts, right? So again, it's this process of seeing where someone's at and going, okay, how much wall do they still need? And you'd only really give up, again, individually, can't just give this like set thing, but you'd only really stop doing wall completely when you had a pretty damn solid 1 minute plus freestanding handstand that was consistent. And then that, you're going to be doing, maybe a few decently long holds as part of your warm up potentially. But if you just abandon the wall too quickly before your freestanding is so solid that you can just get good volume on your hands, you're going to be in trouble most likely. So, again, like, when someone can't even balance a handstand, a lot of their time is just going to be spent on the wall doing drills. And when they start getting more ability, they'll have some of those wall drills to warm up. They'll still do maybe a decent length chest to wall handstand hold just to fire everything up, warm up their line, just wake everything up. And then they'll do a certain amount of freestanding as well. And you just kind of have to go on a case-by-case basis when they can start reducing that and increasing the freestanding stuff. What are their goals? How much time in the week do they have to train, stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. So, and I think that's super, super key as well. So coming off the wall too early or not, I guess,
Way too
respecting
early.
the wall.
That's what everyone does. They just come off the wall basically too quickly. And there's so much to still learn there, and you can still do the freestanding stuff as well. It's just not leaving that behind too soon when you're still very much at the beginning of the handstand journey, I guess.
And the freestanding stuff gets way more fun when you're actually catching handstands. So
yeah, and those wall drills help so much with that
Yeah.
process as well. I mean, you do get those lucky few, I guess. Even maybe they haven't done handstands as a kid or been exposed to much movement, that just kick up, can hold longer and longer and longer and progress quickly. I've taught people like that before as well, but I would say that's definitely the minority.
Yes, 100%. I wish that I was more like that as well. Are there any other, coming off the wall too early, are there any other really common beginner mistakes, even in mindset, in understanding about how much you need to be training, anything like that you can avoid?
There's a huge one in terms of mindset. People think that it's like just general strength training and they can just train like once or twice a week and get a lot better. I'm not saying you can't make progress training handstands like twice a week, but it is that evil combination again of physical preparedness and skill. So the skill element, for example, kicking up and catching, takes a lot of volume. Even when you have prerequisites and you can do your wall drills well, your rebalance, underbalance, overbalance is pretty good, you still need a lot of volume of just doing that. And people often say, oh, kids pick up so quick. Yes, it's, scientifically proven that kids' brains just have more plasticity or whatever, I don't know the proper term, and they pick stuff up quickly. But if you watch a kid, they get into handstands before school, after school, lunchtime, they're kicking up and trying to do it. They get excited, they have that frequency, and they do a lot of the things they love. So it's not just because they're young, it's because they often have a different approach as well. So yeah, a common pitfall to answer your question is beginners, especially adults, just underestimating the amount of work it takes. One question I often ask when I start a short course cycle or start working with a student, I go, have you ever worked at least 3 times a week for 30 minutes at a time on your handstands for at least 3 months consistently?
How many people say yes to that?
Very rare.
Yeah.
Very, very rare.
Yeah.
So that's just an answer in itself. It's like just adherence. It's like, as we've talked about, it is a hard thing. It's not to put people off. Anyone can pretty much, learn. But it takes work. It can't be bought. There's no instant gratification. A lot of people are looking, can I just have 3 tips? And then they think they're going to hold a handstand. It's like, no, they might be the right 3 tips. They might help you a lot, but you'll still need to apply those tips over weeks and months to notice any kind of real change. So people give up too soon and don't practice enough, generally speaking.
100%. And I also think that, especially for, my understanding of the body is far more to do with the strength stuff than the hand balancing stuff. But another huge thing that I see as well is people not applying, while it's definitely it's not just like regular strength training, a lot of the principles of regular strength training still apply. So for example, if you
human body still is a human body.
Yes,
so,
absolutely. Yeah. So if you warm up with a 30-second chest to wall hold and you only ever do that, then you're not going to really be getting that much stronger because you're not really significantly increasing the volume of the work that you're doing or the intensity of the work that you're doing. So you might get more and more proficient at just that, but your overall work capacity is not really going to go up very much.
Absolutely.
So if that's one of the limiting factors to how you're practicing the handstand, if it's already 3 minutes, well, maybe to get your first handstand, you don't really need to focus on taking that to 5 minutes straight away.
No, it's not going to make no difference at all.
Exactly. If you're early on and 30 seconds is challenging, even if a minute's challenging for one set and the second set you're getting, 45 seconds or something like that, we need to make sure that we're still applying some degree of progressive overload to the strength and capacity work. It doesn't change just because it's a handstand or because kids can do it. Like there is still a strength element and a very specific strength element too as well. When you're in a kind of end range shoulder flexion, that's going to make it so much easier for you to learn how to hold the positions and learn how to do everything. So applying those same strength training fundamentals to your strength and endurance work of the handstand, I think is another really key.
Absolutely. And it's just the art of balancing that with what is generally required of like more frequency.
Yes.
So it's just getting the right balance, because you can easily do a strength and conditioning bodyweight session or with weights or whatever and push too hard and not be able to handstand properly for 2 days afterwards. I've tried that myself. So it's you take those, like, I guess those principles from, like, say, like Poliquin principles, Charles Poliquin, awesome dude. He's got a great book, Poliquin Principles. So it's all about just the programming and fundamentals of like strength development and mass development. And you got to take those things and then you have to translate them into handstand language or handstand world, I guess, and take into account the unique variables of that practice. But those things still apply. They often just need to be modified because we're not bodybuilding or doing powerlifting. We're now doing handstands, but we still need strength and conditioning. So it's kind of, for me, it was a big process of road testing on myself and working with other people and experimentation to kind of get to where I am now. And it's always changing. Like each course I do, I modify stuff. I definitely am pretty critical of what I do. So I try and keep it like evolving. And I think that's another point when it comes to mindset with handstands and coaching. There's a fine line between being like critical and being overcritical, which is counterproductive. And there's a fine line between being happy with what you're doing and being too happy and just no longer trying to progress what you're doing, whether it's your practice or your coaching. So that's been, at times, a difficult one for me to walk, but I definitely feel these days in a much better place with all of that. I think part of it is just maturity. You get older and you just realize your bullshit and your patterns, and you just kind of grow up a little bit, I guess. It's a very simple way of putting it.
Yeah. And some people don't as well, but I think hopefully that growing up thing, I think is a direct result of that, at least some kind of self-awareness and some critical eye, not necessarily criticism, but critical eye for what you're doing and how to progress it. And I personally definitely struggle with the same thing, and I don't know if I'll ever get it perfectly right, that perfect middle way the entire time, but I certainly get better at forgiving myself when I stray either side. And but I think that's a practice thing as well, right? So
yeah, it's the cliche of you just got to make mistakes and you learn from them. Mm-hmm. But I guess the key is learning from them and applying it, because we can all probably relate, everyone listening, me and you, to making the same mistakes quite a lot of times over and over again before finally getting the message. And you go, damn it, if only I just sort of listened to myself or that person 2 years ago then. Yeah. But that's just hindsight, not much you can do. But, hopefully next time you have a mistake or a flaw going on, you can respond to it a little bit sooner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so the next kind of topic that I have, I've written the title, The Barren Desolate Wasteland of Handstand Plateaus. And this is a place that people get stuck for months or sometimes even years.
I've lived in the desert.
Yeah. And it's one of the most frustrating things that can possibly happen to anyone. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this whole idea of plateauing in handstands, because some people are of the opinion that it's absolutely inevitable and it's just going to happen. And other people think that you can, have the right method. But I want to start by asking you, like, what do you think is going on in principle during a plateau? Let's just say that someone's kind of been at this stage where they're like kicking up, and every 10, 20 reps, they're getting like a kick ups, they're getting like a 3 to 4 second hold, and they've just kind of been there for like a year. What do you think is happening? And how would you diagnose that?
I made a post about this, so I minimized you for a second. You can just edit out this long pause.
No, it's all staying in, dude.
All right.
I'm just going to zoom in.
Where's my document?
Zoom in slow motion on your face as this happens.
Great. So you have a plateau. Something I think about it is like, what part of the skill is the roadblock? Is it flexibility? Is it strength? Or is it the skill element itself? So it's kind of like a filter you could run it through.
Like a diagnosis.
Yes, a diagnosis. My brother talks about, like, he calls it selling like a doctor, but it really means when you meet someone for the first time and they've asked you to help them, you just, you have to analyze what's going on and have a good talk with them. And communication is probably the biggest thing with coaching. Communication is just everything. So another point is, have I solidified previous progressions or skipped any? So that's a huge one. You're going, have I skipped over anything that's fundamental? And
can you give me an example of like a progression, like that one could skip over and that could bite them in the ass?
In the ass? Let's have a good think about this. I guess it's back to like rebalance drills. Like, is your like overbalance and underbalance corrections off the wall just crap?
Right.
And then you're kicking up and only holding for 3 seconds. Like, that's really common. There's often a very strong correlation between someone having, like, in my mind, like mastered those drills, and there's different layers of progression for those drills as well that I usually teach. So when someone's quite proficient at those, I generally see a pretty big increase in their ability to hold their handstand. It's almost like you work those balance mechanics, you work the kick up, and they eventually kind of meet in the middle. So that'd be like a quick and dirty example. Nice. And also another one is people sometimes create the idea that they're in a plateau when they aren't. They just don't realize that what they're doing is quite impressive or difficult, and it's just going to take more time. So another point that I made here in one of these posts was, am I being realistic with how much time it's going to take, or am I simply being impatient? Some things take years to develop. They just do. Yeah. It might not even be a plateau. And another thing is, like, sometimes it's kind of like the frog boiling in the pot. You know, the frog's in the pot, it's boiling, it doesn't realize that it's boiling, eventually being cooked and eaten. It can be like that with yourself, where someone might have not seen you for a month and they come and go, wow, that's really improved. And you go, what? Really? I feel like I've been stuck, because you're there with yourself every day, just watching, you know, looking at your videos and just thinking you're not getting better. But it's even when someone's progressing quickly with handstands and a lot of things, it's just little bit. So you do have to like sort of call it like zooming out and zooming in. You have to kind of zoom out a little bit sometimes and just look at the bigger picture to realize what's going on in that sense. And also another point is, like, am I making any progress with my current approach, or do I need to seek outside guidance? Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes you've just exhausted, you know, your little toolkit, and it's just, you know, you really are plateauing. Maybe it's been months without any even small improvement. To lead on to another post and point I've made before, and this can be a plateau buster. And again, this is something that a coach can often help you identify. And I call it productive and unproductive failure. Nice. So, and this is like a little bit like esoteric, I guess. I'll try and explain it my best, which is, like, you can be practicing a skill and failing in a way that's never going to lead to success in that skill. And you can be practicing a skill and failing in a way that's productive, that's eventually building to something.
That's huge, dude.
So I guess, and it ties back to some previous points. It's like, okay, I'll give you an example, and it's a bit out there, but I recently, it's been about a month now, started working on a specific kick up to one arm drill. It's kind of like a cartwheel kick up to holding your one arm. And I'd never worked it before. Amazing hand balancer called Yuval, at Yuval Oz on Instagram, does some really cool stuff, and he inspired me with this particular drill. Great guy, check him out. Yeah. And I had the prerequisite. The main prerequisite of that skill is obviously a solid one-arm handstand, at least on my right side. Pretty confident on the right. So I knew that it was a good time to begin working it. And I was training it, but each session, each week, I was failing. Like, you know, it took me, like, I calculated out like almost 1,000 attempts before I got it. I do 30 attempts every practice session for about a month, working, you know, 5 days a week, whatever, 30 minimum probably. But I just felt like I was getting closer. I was understanding it, but I was falling and fucking up all over the place. I got videos of me just going, falling over all crazy. And then eventually after 4 weeks, I started getting my first ones. Now I've been getting almost one every session. Still, like, loads of work to go to get it solid, but it was productive failure. I had the previous main progression for it. I had somewhat of a technical idea of what I needed to do. And I felt each week that I was feeling like it was moving towards something or towards somewhere. And I guess unproductive failure could be going back to a lot of previous points we made in this call about, you know, someone's shit scared of falling. You see them go to the middle of the room and they kick up, you know, halfway up, barely making it up, and then they come back down. And, you know, a month goes by, they're still doing that. A year goes by, they're still doing that. That would be an example of unproductive failure. You're failing and nothing's never, ever going to happen unless you address that key point of learning how to fall and not being scared.
Dude, that's such a powerful concept. And that can be applied to not just handstands, but so many different skills. And I think a big key with the unproductive failure side of things, there's the feedback loop is far too open. The feedback, the time between kicking up halfway and doing that same mistake, the very same category of mistake, the very same specific mistake over and over and over again, is not being identified and worked on and progressed so that you can make a slightly better quality of mistake or anything like that. There's just like the same thing over and over again. There's no feedback loop of understanding how to improve that specific thing, even if you're still failing, even if you're still making mistakes, to progress up and to make less of the same kind of mistake or make less mistakes overall altogether or to make mistakes in a different aspect of the skill with that one being slightly more proficient. That's kind of how you start to approach those complex skills. And yeah, I think that's a really, really awesome, just fundamental principle that someone can look at themselves. If they've just been stuck in a plateau, it can be really frustrating. And regardless of how much of a plateau it actually is, it can still feel really frustrating. But I feel like, this whole doctor approach of the diagnosis and then trying to figure out, kind of triaging a little bit, like, well, where is the problem? Where's the breakdown? Where is the limiting factor in my ability to progress?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's like, well, how much do you practice? And again, they say, I practice once every fortnight. We're like, well, that's probably the main thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're practicing a skill and it's just like zero change, specifically if it's not a strength related skill, and it's just like a skill, like kicking up and catching or like balancing a one-arm handstand, provided you have the physical conditioning, and you keep doing the same thing. And for like, extended period of time, like a month or two, like zero perceptible improvement. That could be just because you're doing what we just talked about. You're just doing exactly the same thing and expecting a different result. So in that case, like just trying something different, like just whatever variable you can think of changing, just try and even change it. And it's just one of those things. Just don't keep doing the same thing that's not working, because it's not going to just generally suddenly one day happen if you're just failing unproductively. I guess we can use that word again.
100%. And I think that one more slight deviation from this, but definitely still in the same theme. And I might have mentioned this example on another podcast, so forgive me if I have, but I use the example of surfing. And with complex skills, you can often spend a lot of time practicing, but almost zero time in the specific position or situation that you're trying to cultivate skill in.
Yeah.
So for example, in surfing, like when I first started surfing, and I used to hate surfing when I first started it because
it's difficult.
Especially I lived in Melbourne. And so I'd drive an hour and a half out of the city to get down to a break. I'd get changed into my wetsuit after we'd look at the break. I'd paddle out, I'd get smashed, I'd get in, and then I'd sit there. I didn't know where to sit. I'd wait for the wave to come, and I'd try and paddle onto the wave. Finally, when one would come and I'd be in the right position and no one else was there, and I'd fuck up my pop-up.
Yeah. I've often likened it. Yeah, go.
Yeah, I'd do that for an hour and a half and then get out of the water and then get changed and drive back home. I spent like 6 hours dedicated to surfing, and I've spent zero time with my feet on a board.
Yeah.
So how much better have I got at surfing in that time? Not at all. Even though I spent 6 hours, and I could do that twice a week. Oh my God, I spend so much time surfing, I'm just not getting better. Well, the analogy to handstands is the kick up without ever really catching any time in the handstand. If you're only kicking up in the middle of the floor, 1 in 20, 1 in 40, you might have spent 6 seconds in an uncontrolled handstand the entire session. Doing that twice a week, well, 12 seconds is not really enough in a whole over the course of 7 days to create some kind of real meaningful stimulus.
Definitely.
So
I absolutely relate to that. I mean, for me, I liken learning how to surf myself. I learned when I was like early teens, was like pretty much putting myself in a giant washing machine with a hard piece of wood and putting it on like spin cycle. Like that's basically learning to surf initially. Like, it's full on, and like what you're saying is really true. Like instead of just paddling out on some big break and trying to go like across the face of the wave, you're much better off just like learning basic tools, just like literally on the sand with the board, and then going to a nice soft beach break and just catching white water, and even just on your tummy to start with, just riding across the wave, like straight, not across, on your stomach, and then eventually trying to just pop up and just stand on the board as it moves forward, like
on a bigger, more stable board, not some little short performance piece.
Exactly, like one of those big foam kind of like sort of things. You'll just learn so much quicker that way. So I can relate to that, having surfed a fair bit when I was
and I'd say the equivalent to the handstand, the equivalent to your bigger board and the smaller, less hectic waves is the wall, a more stable surface to help you spend more time in that position, and then progressively spend less and less time. Like you're still using the wall as a proxy and its assistance, But maybe you start with just a static chest to wall hold as just a pure example. There's many different variations, but just as this example, you might start with a static chest to wall hold where there's no real motion at all, and you're just trying to get used to being in that position. And then you might start with one leg on the wall and just swapping the legs really quickly in that toe pull kind of drill. And then maybe there'll be slightly more time in between swapping of the legs, which will be even more time with the wall there, but you're still spending far more time upside down. And that's slowly filling in the gaps between where you are and where you want to be, but you're not just spending all this time and energy thinking that you're training the handstand when really you've actually spent very little time doing anything that's direct practice for the skill.
Definitely. 100% agree with that. Absolutely. Yeah. It's cool how there's parallels.
Yes.
Between everything, between surfing, between handstands. I even had a pretty important parallel the other day. I did archery for the first time, right?
Nice.
And, one of my flaws occasionally bites me in the butt, and I've gotten better with it, but it's just like overthinking everything. Life, handstands, in the moment, training a particular skill. Yeah, for sure. And when I was doing archery, I realized, we were doing like instinctive archery, I guess. We didn't have sights or aiming or anything. We're just hitting a target. And when I just sort of drew the bow back and just focused on the target and just how things felt, I was much more accurate than when I tried to point to a specific spot with the arrow and really think about it too much. And it's like super simple thing. And I was kind of like, interesting. And I went back and practiced the next day on a few skills that had been bothering me a little bit. And I just realized that I was thinking too much in the moment. But as we said earlier today, I just needed to feel in that moment and just instinctively to react what was taking place on that particular attempt. Again, an earlier thing we said is you fall and fuck up for different reasons sometimes every attempt.
Yeah.
And I realized I just kind of forgotten that. And I was just getting too caught up in what I needed to do rather than what I needed to do in that moment to hold the position.
Dude, that's an awesome transfer, awesome takeaway. And this is starting to lead me in the direction where I want to ask you a couple more questions to close up, because like you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this whole practice has been personal development as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's, it's a bit funny, but at the same time, it's true. And I'd love to really ask you, what lessons have you learned in this whole 8 years of really dedicated handstand practice that you've been able to apply to other parts of your life?
Yeah, it's definitely taught me patience. So just patience in general, patience with everything in life, I guess, and just realizing that it takes time for any meaningful change to take place in a lot of different things, especially if it's something, difficult and worthwhile doing. It's just going to take time. So I guess, again, I have that more of a zoomed out approach to a lot of things now as well, and a little bit more of a strategic mindset than I did when I was younger. Another thing it taught me, it's kind of quite a humbling experience. Like I said, when I started, I thought I was special and this, that, and the other, and there's a fair bit of ego involved. We all have an ego, and I won't go right into all that kind of stuff, but it's definitely made me just a bit more accepting of where I'm at and not always trying to, I guess when I started, I kind of wanted to do it in some way to feel good about myself. Because there was issues, I guess, around self-esteem. And you grow up and everyone's doing cool stuff and you're reading this and that. And I just felt like I would feel better about myself as I got more and more skilled. And it's a huge trap, because it's like when someone's like, oh, when I earn this much money here, I'll feel good. When I earn this, and then they're a billionaire and they're still unhappy, right? So it was a total trap. But ultimately, I realized why I did it was not to feel good about myself, really. It was just a love for the specific, I guess, let's call it an art form. But even more than that, it's not just about the handstands. I think for me, I've always had to do some kind of physical training. It's kind of like therapy for me, just to move my body and just being really present. And I guess handstands teaches you focus as well. And that's another attribute I've learned from it, is just being really present. It is definitely a form of meditation, and especially as you get to some of the higher levels and you start developing a one-arm practice, you really do have to focus a lot. Even a momentary lapse in concentration can make you just fall out of some of the more difficult positions, depending on where you're at. And you see it when you teach people as well. They're holding, and then they fall, and they're like, oh yeah, I just thought about something else for a second. If a second's long enough for you to lose balance and fall out of it. So Yeah, those are definitely some key lessons I've learned. It's also just given me confidence because it is a challenging, grueling thing to do, and I could have given up many times along the way, and I just kind of stuck with it. So now when I approach something new that's difficult, I guess I'm just not as hard on myself and not picking it up and being great at it straight out of the bat. I have a bit more compassion with myself, I guess, with new things. And I'm also definitely way more conscious of like, do I actually want to take this thing on?
Yeah. Yeah,
I have a
100%.
realistic understanding. It's like, do I want to start this really involved hobby or niche training thing? So sometimes it's just a no because I have more of an understanding of what's involved.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That's really cool. And that self-esteem one is such a it's such an interesting one because yeah, I think I definitely not specifically with hand balancing, but I think with just fitness in general, I definitely had that out of the gate, wanting to go and get more proficient in this because I thought that once I could do more things or look a certain way that I would feel better about myself.
Totally.
And it's tricky because in one sense I was right, but it didn't work how I thought it was going to work. Like in the beginning, I thought, well, maybe once I can do a handstand and a backflip, I will look at my ability to do those things and think better about myself because of that. And that's not how it works.
No.
I'm not like fucking, oh, thank God I can do a backflip now. My life is so much better. Like, not at all. But the whole cliche, it's the process. But like, but the process of actually doing those things and overcoming those, practicing really, really hard, being really
that makes
patient.
You feel better about yourself. 100%. It's the process of doing it, not the skill and thing itself. Yeah, you really nailed it on the head. Then that's you. Yeah,
I'm thinking of summing it up like it's not the destination, it's the journey or something. Yeah, no, I think I just made that up then.
Yeah, that was great. This is recorded. Yeah, that's an awesome way of putting it. It's like that, and like I said earlier, like that's that confidence you get from just going through all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as much of it's as it's a fucking cliche, like I think it's important to highlight because I don't want to ever give someone the opinion that like it's not worth starting because you're not going to feel any happier when you do it. Because that's not necessarily true, I think. While there are many, it's not the achievement of the thing, because there are many, like you said, billionaires who have made all the money, more money than they ever dreamed of, and still fucking hate life. Same thing with, fitness, professionals and fitness enthusiasts and whatever. There's plenty of people that look.
It happens with everything in life. For me, when I started training, it was like, oh, if my muscles are bigger, I'll feel better about myself. When you're like, 18 years old training in the gym, just going, yeah, or if I'm, if I was taller, or if I was richer, or whatever it is, you think that you're then going to be happy, but it's not really the case.
No, absolutely not. But then on the other side as well, like the process, I'll speak myself, like the process of going and doing things that I actually didn't think I was going to be able to do, or I didn't have the faith in myself to even give myself a chance to do. And then after I accomplished like a couple of more smaller menial things, and I'm like, maybe I could actually do the next thing. And then once I achieved that, maybe I could actually do like that process of achievement, that process of failing forwards, developing a better relationship with failure, all of those different things that can come from a dedicated practice like hand dancing.
Yeah, developing a better relationship with yourself, I guess.
100%. And that in turn eventually made me anyway, helped me feel better about myself.
Yeah, and I 100% relate to that.
Yeah. So it's not quite so simple as one or the other, but I think, yeah, it can definitely teach you a lot.
Yeah. It's been a great teacher for me personally.
Yeah, dude. I wanted to quickly come back to that focus as a last question. You mentioned the focus that it brings you as well. Do you find that focus has transferred to other areas of your life?
That's a good one. And I have never been officially diagnosed, but I feel like I'm a little bit ADHD.
Sure.
All my report cards from when I was growing up were like, Sundi has trouble focusing, Sundi has potential, blah, 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 blah. And another classic characteristic is I can focus with laser-like focus on things I'm really interested in. But if I'm not interested in them, I just look at the page and just look at a bunch of squiggles and I just don't take anything in. So I definitely have a little bit of that. And it's something that I've been like working through because obviously, running a coaching business, there's, the fun stuff that I can focus on is the coaching and, program writing and my practice. But there's the other side of things. There's, writing up posts, which they can be fun to do, but sometimes you just have to force yourself to write. Yeah. There's, managing your calendar, all kinds of different things that go on there. And yeah, sometimes it's hard to focus on that stuff. I think for me, as I get older, I've settled a bit and I have a bit more focus just naturally. I do think the practice of doing handstands has helped cultivate a bit more focus. The biggest one for me personally, though, is meditation. Even just 10 minutes at the start of my day. If I meditate at the start of my day and don't jump straight off on my phone, I have a lot more just focus and presence throughout the day. Even just simple things like we're in a very distracting society, you know, with our phones always on us and messages and things popping up. If I limit my phone time, I also have a lot more focus. And I think there's quite a few cool guys on YouTube, again, don't remember specific names, but that talk about when people say, oh, I'm not a very focused person, or, oh, I'm not a very patient person, that these are actually skills and qualities, just like handstands, that you can practice. So you can practice focus. You can practice patience. So I've started thinking about it a little bit like that, rather than, oh, maybe I potentially have ADHD or some other disorder and I can't focus, as maybe I just haven't practiced focusing enough. And I'm trying to think of it that way. And it does seem to help. And I seem to be able to be more efficient with my workflows and processes, even with the stuff that's not as exciting.
Man, I'm so glad I asked you that question. That was such a good answer. And, you know, that's definitely my stance on it as well. And I'm not a doctor, and this is not to say that disorders don't exist or anything like that.
Of course. Yeah.
But that's what you've just described as an incredibly empowering for yourself statement. And it's an empowering mindset, because to whatever extent or not that someone does have a disorder like ADHD, they will always be able to move themselves further along by deliberate practice of things like focus and patience and practices like meditation. And it might be harder for that person, but I don't think that it's really impossible for anyone except the rarest of rarer cases. And I think that anyone, even if you don't have fucking ADHD, man, like, we are assaulted by distractions and things that are, you know, being thieves of our attention and playing with our hormone and reward circuitry.
Commodity. Our attention is the greatest commodity.
100%.
That's what everyone's vying for. It's just our attention. And
so I think that just some form of practice of both digital hygiene, as I like to call it, like just understanding, understanding how to manage your inputs so that you have some focus and attention left to dedicate to things you actually care about. And also a formal practice like meditation and or hand dancing is a really good pincer approach to, no matter where you are along that spectrum of attention, to make that a little bit more, to become a little bit more proficient in that.
Yeah. It's a good attitude to have, I believe.
Yeah, dude. Man, this has been super fun. I've really enjoyed, enjoyed chatting to you. And you've dropped some absolute bombs, both philosophically and handstand specific. So,
well, that's good. I envisioned long, awkward pauses and a thinking block. But yeah, it was good.
It was fun. This is going to be a pleasure to edit, man. There's going to be none of those. So yeah,
it was good. I think we got into some pretty good nitty gritty stuff that'll hopefully be useful to some listeners out there.
100%, man. And if people did enjoy listening to you talk about handstands, have been kind of inspired to practice, but don't want to fall into all those little pitfalls and, you know, want to start working with a coach, like, where can they find you and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably just adding me and messaging me on Instagram. So my account there is at Suby, Suby, Handstands. Just look me up there and just get in touch. The easiest way to just start a dialogue is just have a chat, just see where you're at, what you're struggling with, and just connect over there. I offer basically like in-person if you're in Melbourne. So I talk about the courses a little bit, in-person privates. I then have like live Zoom private sessions that I do as well. So just like working in real time, analyzing, programming, things like that. And then soon, within about 2 to 3 weeks, I'll be launching an asynchronous platform. So more of like send and receive, where you'll have, you'll do assessments, send them to me, I'll critique, respond, give you drills, program for you that way. So that can work well for people that don't want to spend as much money on coaching, working live, which is obviously a higher ticket item. And also with tricky schedules and, let's call them interesting time zones around the world.
And yeah, definitely check in. I'll leave links to all of this in the show notes, and definitely check in because by the time this episode is out, these might actually be available. So I'd really encourage you to go and check those out. And Sundi, man, this has been dope. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure.
Go. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this one. And just a reminder that there are show notes for everything over at whitebelt.com/podcast. You can find links to all of the people, resources, and exercises that we discuss in this podcast. You can also get all of the links for how to get in touch with Sundi if you'd like to work with him in person in Melbourne or online in his new coaching platform, which has just been launched, so you can get in nice and quick. And if you are interested in combining all of the principles and tools that we talk about in this podcast into a cohesive strength training system, I do have a couple of spots open for my one-to-one online coaching as well. You can find links to that in the description. And until next time, guys, have an awesome week. I'll catch you next week.